a discussion, and I'm delighted to welcome four very eminent expert executives who have a very, each of them has a particular and unique view of the PNG economy from the purview of their businesses. Let me just introduce them to you. We have, starting from my far right over there, is Dr. Stephen Nash, who's the Chief Investment Officer for Nambawan Super, which is PNG's largest superannuation fund. I believe it's around 8 billion kina under management, in assets. So,
6 billion funded, 2 billion unfunded.
Okay, so, traditionally that's been mostly members from the public sector who are paying money into that fund, but it's been one of the drivers that, Nambawan Super has been one of the drivers of investment, particularly in PNG's leaner years. It's often been the organisation that's been driving investment into the economy. Make him welcome. Then we have David Lennox, who's going to give us an outsider's view. Sorry, Kennedy, I'll come to you in a second.
No worries.
David in the red tie here is a resource analyst with Fat Profits, which is a name that is one of my favourite company names, I think. But they are an equity research and funds management company, which has currently around 300 million Australian dollars funds under advice. They advise clients on where to put their money, and David has a particular interest and focus on PNG. Sorry, Kennedy, I didn't mean to miss you earlier on. Kennedy Wemin is the CEO of Melanesian Trustee Services Limited. MTSL is the trustee for the Pacific Balanced Fund, which is the PNG's largest private equity fund. And PBF is a shareholder in some of PNG's best-known companies, including Ella Motors, Trukai, and it also has its own companies that are doing work, which I hopefully we'll be able to explore a little bit during this conversation as well. And finally, on my left is Eric Kramer, who's the CEO of PacWealth, investment management company, financial consulting specialist, with a particular focus on PNG and the Pacific region. So will you please make them all welcome? We might start with you, Eric, if I may. Tell me a little bit about what PacWealth does and for whom.
All right. PacWealth is an investment management company. We are licensed by the Bank of Papua New Guinea. We operate out of Port Moresby. We have a satellite office here in Sydney, and we look after institutional clients. So super funds, national provident funds, insurance companies, landowner groups. Mainly in PNG, but as of last year in the Solomon Islands and Fiji as well. Targeting institutional investors.
And as far as the scope of your advice, are you dealing with investments in PNG or outside or both?
Both, but as we all know, especially with PNG clients, there is a little issue with FX. And so the focus is on PNG, but with regards to risk diversification, obviously we look abroad as well.
Excellent. David, we've got some. You brought along some slides. Maybe we'll jump into in a little bit later on if we can. You were telling me, and I think probably it's worthwhile repeating. Your view, and that's the view that's circulated to a lot of your clients about Papua New Guinea, and particularly its progress over the last few years. We were talking about it at dinner last night. Generally speaking, how is PNG seen in the sector, in your sector in Australia?
Certainly, I think when you look at the investment sector, a couple of standouts probably initially knocked the PNG standing inside the investment community. One of those was obviously what we saw happening with Bougainville. That really did shake the community up a fair bit. And we saw, I would imagine, a significant flow of investments away from New Guinea at that particular point in time. However, since then, I guess there's really been one key project that now does stand out, and that's obviously the acronym that we now have for the Papua New Guinea LNG project, or PNG LNG. That's really been the key project in recent times that has again focused the investment community onto PNG and the potential that that country does provide to investors in terms of continual and stable returns over a commensurate period of time.
And do you anticipate additional or similar interest in the Papua LNG project, which is the one which Total, the French oil company, is looking to develop in PNG?
Look, certainly if you have a look at what's happening in the LNG space especially, you'd have to suggest that the very big major energy producers in this world are starting to perhaps move their production focus away from liquid molecules and more towards natural gas molecules. ExxonMobil are doing it, Shell are doing it. Of course, there's a company in this room that's already doing that. And we think that when you have a look at the sea change of events that are happening inside the energy sector across the globe, LNG is going to be, or natural gas, which is its base derivative, is going to be a key transition commodity from what is a carbon-based energy consumption use to a renewable energy-based consumption use. So PNG as a country has been blessed with the one commodity that will be a significant part of that process over a very long period of time. And we believe that with the success that we've seen with the LNG projects that they've got there now, that's going to attract more investment into that sector in that particular country.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
From your perspective, would you agree that there is a global mispricing of PNG risk?
Look,
Because I think there is.
Look, investment people have long memories, and unfortunately Bougainville does sit in the minds of the investment community. And that risk doesn't easily go away, because if you have a look at Bougainville now, unfortunately it's still a big hole in the ground and nothing's happening. So that risk is still not so much at the fore, but it is there. Yes, PNG has over the course of time put in a number of statutory structures that will somewhat placate investors' fears of that risk. But the real change and the real entity that has changed that risk in the short term has been the success of their LNG project. And that will bring the investment market back to focusing on Papua New Guinea.
Excellent. Good question. Might have asked that myself. Kennedy, it seems that there's maybe a shift in what the Pacific Balance Fund is doing as far as a strategic shift, perhaps. Traditionally, maybe you've held significant but not dominant stakes in other companies. I mentioned a couple of those in my introduction. But you seem now to be maybe starting to drive your own businesses. I'm thinking particularly of PVF Agribusiness. Perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit about where you're taking your fund as far as going from being more proactive, perhaps, in the PNG market.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. And look, before I actually come to that answering that question, this is actually the first platform that we've had. So I want to thank PNG Advantage for inviting us to this panel. Just to give you an overview of the fund and just sort of a snapshot, and so I guess I guess the audience can understand, I think, when I answer the question. Our fund is a unit trust, and obviously we've private equity, and we've have investments in a range of blue chips and high-performing PNG entities. By comparison to super funds and I guess resource managed funds, super funds basically, they're obviously net value, obviously supported by the contributions of members on a monthly or fortnightly basis. And then the levies from projects and obviously income supports the mineral funds that are being managed. But we obviously are dependent purely on the yields that we get on our investments. So just to put things in perspective, and if I can just give a snapshot of, let's say, a period from 2010 to 2015, let's say that Dr. Nash placed 1,000 kina with us. If he had placed it in a range of vehicles that we have available in PNG, if he had placed it at a savings deposit, he probably would have made 16 kina out of that 1,000 kina. If he had placed it in a term deposit, 252 kina of the 1,000. In a superannuation fund, maybe about 480 kina. If he had placed it with us, he would have made 1,226 kina in the same period. Over savings, so you're looking at a savings growth of about 123%, and in the same period, he would have received a distribution of more than 150 kina. So that's, I guess, a snapshot of our fund and in our achievements over the last couple of years. Going forward from 2017 onwards, we're looking at an annual compounded annual growth rate of about 14% going forward for the next 5 years. So I guess we've worked hard. We started in 2002 with 75%, 75 million kina. We're now in excess of about 600 million. So you know, there's a story behind that. Now, having said that, my firm belief and our firm belief is that relationships create wealth. They make money. And so whilst we've inherited a lot of the blue chips that we do have, it's a lot of work has gone into investing in the relationships, which has led us to where we are and the successes that we've had. In terms of maybe changing the shift and then coming back to your question, look, we've been dependent, I think, for a very long time on the yields that we get, and they come on an annual basis. There are long waits in between, but the opportunities come and go. And so we're shifting our focus a little bit into more, short income type investments for the fund. And also at the same time, like everybody else, we're shifting our focus into the agro sector. We're also investing in the power and also the property market. We, in fact, at this very moment, are undertaking a 400 unit housing development up in Bomana. So we're shifting as well. And I guess like everybody else, we've, I think, for a long time been PNG based. We're actually looking now regionally as well.
Thanks, Kennedy. Stephen, Nambawan Super, I guess, has a challenge which all super funds have to address, which is you have to achieve growth, and it has to be growth above inflation, which in PNG is running at 6.5% each year at the moment. So it's not it's a significant challenge to achieve that growth. But you've also got to preserve members' funds and be conservative in your investment. Where has Nambawan Super been placing investments in the recent times, and where do you see it? Do you see a change happening in where you're actually investing to get that growth?
Well, thanks for that. I think in terms of the target is sort of a medium-term target above CPI. So it's not every year. We try to do it over the cycle, 2% above CPI. We've had a change recently where we're focusing more on realised dividend payments from our investments rather than mark-to-market valuation changes which affect our crediting rate. That's been a systematic change over quite a few years. What we're tending to find with our companies is that a lot of them retain a lot of their earnings and not pay it out, but we're trying to engage with them and indicate that we want to partner with them and provide capital when it's needed. It's probably a lot easier for us to invest in existing companies than going and finding startups. We don't typically invest in startups, although we're very interested in infrastructure development. Some of the things we're looking at are the cable. We've been very supportive of that over a long period of time. We understand that there's...
This is the submarine cable to connect PNG.
Submarine able cable, I think you could call it. That will connect Sydney and Port Moresby. We've been trying to push that for quite a while. We think it's very important for the country as a whole. We'd like to achieve a typical private equity return, but we're cognizant of the need of it, and there's a bit of a trade-off here because when that cable comes, we're going to get a lift in all the companies' earnings that we own at the moment. So even from a selfish point of view, even just looking at the companies we own, it's going to be very important for us. But I think it will change things and actually save lives. So it's essential that we get this going. And we're looking to participate in that. I think a few difficulties with that have been where the various participants haven't all sat down together. There's been conversations in separate rooms about separate things, but I think we need to get together. The community is fairly small in PNG, and we need to cooperate because this is really important. We're interested in power projects. There's a few on the go at the moment. I think the infrastructure space is exciting. We need to get good governance and all the parts that link into that as well. So we're working on that with a few providers at the moment. But to get transactions going, it takes a while. We have an investment committee that wants things done immediately, and we say we have to do them properly. So it does take time, but I think that's the hallmark, I think, for NSL's point of view, is they've always been very careful in their investments, and we're going to continue to do that.
So, with future projects, if someone was going to bring a project to you,
Yeah.
what are the prerequisites for you to look at a project? If you know, what sort of things are you looking for in a proposal or in a...
Well, we have to follow the Bank of PNG's prudential standards, so we typically send the proposer a pro forma which includes all the things that are required for a proposal to be presented. Now, it has to be presented to the licensed investment manager who analyses it and also works with the proposer to get it together. What used to happen in the old days was there would be a one-page proposal, and that would be funded. And that just can't occur anymore. So we're trying to lift the standard of these proposals. It takes time, but we're looking in terms of private equity is common worldwide, and you're looking over, if you can get over 20% for private equity, it's a risky gig, you know, private equity. We need to get the return. However, we'll look at the infrastructure and nation building aspects of this, and we're very, very focused on that as well. We think we have a role to play in terms of leading infrastructure development. We want to see more of it. So from time to time, we will adjust those expectations. On the debt side, we're very interested in looking at debt transactions, although we're not a bank, so it's difficult for us to monitor these investments the way a bank would. If it suits us, we will definitely consider them, but typically it's not something that we look at all the time, although there can be convertible deals and others that we can look at.
And this is a question which also Kennedy might want to answer. As far as domestic investment, if you're making an investment in a domestic company, what makes a good investment? What makes a company a good investment for a fund such as yourselves? Maybe Kennedy, if you jump in there. What are you looking for?
That's a very interesting question. Look, I mean, opportunities are vary, and I guess it depends, I guess, on the hurdle rates, the risks that obviously the assessment that you make, and a variety of things. I guess for us as a private equity, I think it's the consistency of income that can be used and utilized for future investments. I think that's really, where we're morphing to at the moment. And so those would obviously be of interest. But, you know, having said that, there's a lot of young Papua New Guineans and entrepreneurs out there who have invested. They have taken an idea, a concept to a certain point. And I guess, you know, beyond that, due to, you know, lack of financial capacity or variety of issues, I think have gone and are stuck. And I think, you know, for a private equity like ours, I think, you know, we, I guess, provide the sort of, the best platform, I guess, for people like that to maybe come and talk to us, to try and look at maybe enhancing or you know, obviously growing the business and enhancing value and extracting, I guess, the best return out of it.
Does an investment have to be a particular size before you get interested?
Well, I guess we wouldn't do anything. Obviously, look, at the end of the day, I think it's really, in a growing market and economy like PNG, I think it's really about potential. And obviously looking at the potential of each opportunity, I think, and the kind of returns that it provides, I think would interest us a lot. And we have had a lot of people come and talk to us on a variety of matters and a variety of projects as well.
And so,
Yeah, I just want to add, we are the licensed investment manager for the Nash fund, and together with Nash fund, we work on the basis of a strategic asset allocation, which essentially gives guidance to the allocation of assets over various asset classes. Now we have done a review of that strategic asset allocation in the beginning of this year, and we have added a new asset class to the mix that was already there, and that is infrastructure. And so that is one of the investments that we're looking at the moment. But that strategic asset allocation is one of the first things that we look at when we look at any individual investment. Does it fit with the strategic asset allocation for the fund? And that's the first hurdle, if you like.
Are there examples where both funds have gone into the same investment? Or would that happen?
I think in the past there may have been, but we're looking more and more at that. We are cooperating in a lot of these transactions more and more. We hope to do more of that. I think it's logical for us to do
And
that.
it follows the earlier comment that you made that we need to engage, and there was a comment that was made earlier by the futurologist as well. We've got to open up, and both domestically and internationally. I think we private sector, public sector, I think should get out of their ivory towers effectively and talk. And that goes for infrastructure and various other items. I think, and I get a feeling that we're seeing more of that, especially of late. I think the 100-day plan is a good example of that. And you can argue over the content of the plan, but the fact that there was a consultative process and that various parties within PNG were consulted I think is a good step forward. And I think that well, especially the super funds have a role to play. If we look at the government coffers, they're pretty empty at the moment, and the super funds have as Kennedy was saying, have fortnightly contributions coming in, and there's room for cooperation, I would say, and yeah, data cable is a very good example, I would say.
David, do you think there's an appetite from outside of PNG for investment in infrastructure?
You'd have to suggest that every country needs infrastructure. Yeah, we've got many countries in the region where infrastructure, as in India, is antiquated and old and needs replacing. And we've obviously seen Donald Trump suggesting that the US is some way down that same track. Yes, you need that infrastructure to actually move the economy itself, to move the individual parts of the economy. If you don't have it, what do? You can't move oil and gas without infrastructure. It would be literally still in the ground. You can't move the mineralisation out of Bougainville without infrastructure. So there's definitely a requirement to have modern and efficient infrastructure so that you can move the economy. If you haven't got it, the economy really does get stuck in a rut. And once an economy is stuck in a rut, it's primarily, you'd see the investment community running like crazy to go everywhere else. Yeah, once upon a time, I guess we used to say, as an investment person, you'd look at the returns, and that was the key driver of looking at a project. Nowadays, we've got so many other facets of what a project and infrastructure should deliver that we actually look at, rather than just, is it going to give me a 15% return over the next 2.5 years? And I think that that's been the key change in the investment community worldwide. They no longer just say we need a return on our assets. Yes, it is an important input, but it's not the only one. And that change has taken some time to come in. But it has happened primarily because, as an industry, I'll hide behind my tie, we've made a lot of mistakes in just following the return equation. So infrastructure is an important part of that equation in moving the economy and moving the returns that you can get from investments within that economy.
I'd like to add that governance is another element that is in the top. Governance is for investments is crucial. and you see in PNG at the moment a number of companies that are growing from the sort of a mom and dad shop to a respectable corporate entity, and that change is difficult, but we see that happening, and we see boards changing. We see boardrooms functioning much better. I was speaking with the chairman of Mainland just now, and I think Mainland is a very good example of that, and that is something that we are very much looking at when we look at investments.
So we talked about infrastructure, and I guess the question with infrastructure also is what policy levers need to be in place. Is there anything that government can do to facilitate this, or is it to a certain extent you don't wait for government, you just forge ahead? Do you have a view on that, Steve?
It's a difficult question. I think
it's not a difficult question.
Australia has in terms of government intervention, Australia has a very large commitment to PNG and will continue to do that. But there are limits to what the Australian government can do. I think what is needed is more private sector involvement, particularly with emerging markets generally, but PNG in particular. Now, this leads into a sort of a pet topic of mine, and that is that a lot of the super funds in Australia are solely focused on the big picture, which is developed markets, where really there's no growth and all the money's been made by technology cutting costs. In economies like PNG, you've got the ability to actually apply those cost reductions with growth. So you've got the potential margin there is enormous. If you could invest in PNG for 30 years, you're going to make a lot of money, but you have to be on the ground, you have to be involved. And there's this detachment of Australia versus PNG. It shouldn't be there, but maybe it's just historical, but there's a lot more private sector involvement that has to occur. Obviously, the super funds in PNG are very interested in doing, but I think we need a bit of help from other funds.
But look at the emergence of the financial sector in Papua New Guinea. That went hand in hand with the Bank of Papua New Guinea and the regulatory environment that was created for it. So I think yes, absolutely, the regulations play a major role, and if we get that right, then that'll bring confidence to investors to invest. So I think the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah, and I think there certainly are examples of that, because I guess PNG as a country legislated in the oil and gas area back in the mid-90s. Yes, there was oil being produced at that time, but the gas was still some way off. And with that legislative security, you've had the big investment energy players comfortable to come into the country and then sit down with the locals and say, well, how do we go about doing this? We've got the statutory framework, the country statutory framework in which we can work, and then you can then focus the actual project, the important part of getting it done with the actual local community. And that's really with PNG where the LNG project has been a significant success for the participants, as in the companies, but also for the country.
So we talked about infrastructure. Agriculture is another area which the Governor mentioned before. Kennedy, you're involved in agribusiness with PBF. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how it's going?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. We've, as a fund, we've, I think, done, in fact, quite recently, just concluded our biggest agricultural, or made our biggest agricultural investment so far in almost a 6,000 acre block of land just 40 minutes outside of Port Moresby. And look, I think the shift is there. Look, PNG, if you look at PNG, we've got I think a millennia of experience in agriculture behind us. So agriculture is not new. It's the commercialization of agriculture that I think is really the investment. Our people know how to plant crops, but when do they harvest it? How do they make it bigger? How do they make it viable? That's really, I think, the challenge. So, at a recent conference in Parliament, I was invited to talk to the parliamentarians there, and I said, look, if you obviously want to get to where we need to go in terms of, development wealth creation, all of that is 3 words: infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. We can go and make all the investments as corporates, but without the necessary infrastructure in place, we cannot take crops to market, we cannot take our produce to market. And neither, there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there or coffee farmers who can't get, produce to market. And so those challenges are there. But then obviously, I guess at this conference, I can add another 3 words: education, education, education. I think it's really important that we focus on educating our people, I guess, and outcome-based type education with the necessary skills to be able to achieve the aspirations that we have. I think Mark said earlier that I think we've, as a country, have found ourselves in a very sweet spot. We 80% of our population still live in the rural sector. We have a lot of land availability for agriculture, but obviously again it comes back to the same issue: infrastructure. So, but as a fund, just coming back to your question, as a fund, we obviously would like to get our hands on obviously some foreign revenue, and so we are obviously looking into that sector, and I think most of the investments that we've had so far have been import-based, and so now we're looking at trying to get some exporting done. So in terms of, obviously, again, just coming back to our 5-year strat plan and the investment strategy going forward, is really to make sure that we have a balanced portfolio.
Eric, you mentioned before the current foreign exchange challenge at the moment. Maybe you might take it in turns. What do you think the implications for the current foreign exchange shortages have been for your operations, and what tactics or what have you taken to actually try and navigate your way around those issues for the benefits of the clients that you have?
Well, moving around them is
it's
quite
maybe
tricky.
that was the wrong phrase to use.
And I can't say anything because my regulator is sitting right opposite me. But look, obviously, it's an impediment, and I find it a funny word. But yeah, it's a pain in the behind. It effectively prohibits investment, and that is a pity. And I think that Papua New Guinea is not unique. Well, yes, it is unique, and it's a beautiful country, etc., etc. But problems that we're facing in country are not new problems. They have been, we have seen them in other countries, and I think we can learn from remedies or actions that others have taken to fix certain problems. And I think we should have that open discussion and have a debate, and not just within Treasury or within the Bank of Papua New Guinea, but I think it should be a broader-based debate, a public debate, if you like, because it touches on everybody effectively. I mean, the coffee growers in June of 2014 all of a sudden got 20% less for their produce in kina terms, and that's an issue. So I think that it's been a struggle, and you showed some slides on about confidence in the economy, and that the CEO survey. I think if 2016 is your baseline, then that was not, well, that's coming from a low level, I think, because I think that at that time it was particularly harsh, and so yeah, people would almost even like to see the upside, and potentially for that reason say, yeah, we expect more. But I think it's a difficult question. I think the answers are not very straightforward, but I think we should not ignore it. Unfortunately, anyway, we can't apply the ostrich technique, stick our heads in the sand and hope it'll go away. I think to a degree it's a man-made problem, and I think we have to unmake it.
Stephen, did it change your fund's behaviour? Have you sort of kind of handled the situation?
Well, we've had difficulty accessing foreign currency for quite a while. We've got a strategic asset allocation that we've been trying to implement for quite a while. We haven't been able to do that, but I think, focusing on changing it and improving the situation is what we've really got to do, and there's several ways I think to do that. One would be to try to accelerate some of these new projects, to get them going as quickly as possible. We've been waiting for a while. We really need to get them going. I think there's also possibility of creating more exports, as particularly in agriculture. We have a really good model. It's called New Britain Palm Oil. Very successful. Very large plantations. That's a good model. Can't we do that with other crops? Can't we do that with coffee? Can't we do that with other crops? That model works. It's not instantaneous, but it has been done and could be rolled out to other areas. Obviously, over time that might break down to smaller plantations and more niche producers, but getting scale in agriculture is to compete globally. You've got to do it. It's just the way it is. So there may be possibilities there, and also in the tourism sector, there's so much potential there. I think talking about it last night with Kavieng, with the Balimsky Highway, it's potential platinum for tourism development at that area. Once the airport's extended, I think that would be something that can bring a lot of foreign exchange in. So trying to be positive and focus on how to fix it rather than talk about the past. I think that's probably the better way to look at it. Yeah.
Kennedy, do you see tourism as an opportunity?
I guess I think the economy is morphed. It's actually I think going through a cycle, and every time it does that, it goes through the cycle. We identify new growth areas, and this time it's agriculture and tourism. I think if I can just answer the question and just shift it slightly. I think it's a belief of mine, and I think because cultured or influenced by the sort of industry that I'm in, I strongly believe that financial institutions should be considered then going forward as an opportunity also for our country. Creating new financial institutions similar to the one that we're, managing at present, can capture a lot of the wasted value that's out there in the market. You've got companies that have lazy balance sheets. You've got, funds that have maybe, non-performing assets that are just sitting there. Why don't we collect all of them, put them into institutional, funds that is properly regulated, that is properly structured, that has proper investment policies and structures and guidelines in place. I think we can go somewhere with it. I know everybody's talking agriculture, and we're doing agriculture. People are talking tourism. We want to do tourism as well. But I think there's another opportunity here, and I think that's the financial sector, the creation of financial institutions. And if you a recent study, I was reading an article, a recent study that was done by the United Nations. 3 countries, Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa, combined have invested 60% of all infrastructure investments in the African continent. Now, we can, lessen the burden on government. If more and more financial institutions, and like Dr. Nash said, I think we are in a very small community. I think we need to start working together. I think we need to meet a lot more often. We need to identify the opportunities. We also need to assist government, commercialize some of these opportunities, and embrace and run with them. I think we can do that. In doing that, also, I think we provide opportunities to Papua New Guineans to be able to become investors and have opportunities that they would not otherwise have. And in that respect, we can be able to create a lot more millionaires. I think we have a great culture. It's called the one-talk system in Papua New Guinea. And I think on the back of that, I think you can see a lot of wealth distribution. And so I think, we need to, sort of take a step back. It's wonderful to run, but sometimes I think we need to stop, take a breather, step back, and explore the opportunities, or maybe we may have missed some.
just ask maybe about some structures or institutions that maybe PNG could do with that it doesn't have. And I'm thinking possibly it doesn't have a very active venture capital sector at the moment. And maybe, for example, it doesn't have a secondary bond market. Do you think either of those or any other measures are things that could help to encourage more investment in PNG than there is currently, or even broader investment? Maybe Eric was.
Absolutely. I think when I said we need to open up, domestically, I think we should work together more closely, listen to each other. But I think internationally, type in PNG in Google, and all you get is bad things. I think we need to open up, and that'll, we need to put ourselves in the shop window and let the world know about the good stories that happen in Papua New Guinea, and financial market reform. I think is an element of that. I think the government bond auctions at the moment are organized in a way that nobody in the rest of the world actually knows about it or can participate. And if you put that on an electronic platform with electronic settlement, then there will be, then the world can see it. And I think it is important that Papua New Guinea, in my view, is very much an island, and there are very few links to the outside world, especially the financial world. And I think that financial market reform is definitely an element that we should look at. And make a big jump from the 19th to the 21st century, 22nd century. I think that, let's face it, there are pension funds in the world that have strategic asset allocations like Nambawan has and like Nash have, that have an allocation of, and it might even be 2% for frontier markets, but 2% of 100 billion is money. And at the moment, Papua New Guinea is not represented in any frontier market index. And therefore that money cannot find Papua New Guinea, and we need to fix that. There's a search for yield going on in the world with interest in the negative territories, and at present we get yields here for some of the bonds at 12-13%. The 1-year T-bills yesterday did 8% for the first time. That's interesting, despite the risks that are there in terms of currency and sovereign risks. I speak with these investors, and they are very much willing to have a look at it. But there needs to be, again, we come back to infrastructure. There needs to be that infrastructure. There needs to be a platform. It needs to be electronic. There needs to be a custodial arrangement. But those things are not insurmountable. They can be fairly easily implemented, but at the same time it needs a regulatory framework around it, and that's something that you do need to think about, because you don't want to open up these already fragile markets to flight capital, for instance. So I think that, but I think yes, I think we should definitely put our heads together and think about ways to put that in place. Absolutely.
Certainly, I think from an outsider's perspective, you don't really need to duplicate in PNG a venture capital market, because the modern investment community now is just so mobile that I've got half a dozen venture capital companies that I can call on anywhere in the world. So what PNG does really need to do into the future is ensure that it is on display. That, whether it's the government or some private organisation within that country does actually say, well, look, this is the potential that this country has. And it doesn't then sort of go into a little closet and say, well, we'll set up a little venture capital company so that they can go out and sell us. You've already got that ability with the structures that you've got in place. And the modern investment community, as I say, is so mobile now. I mean, I can talk to anyone in the twinkling of an eye and get any sort of information that I want in the twinkling of an eye. So you really need to ensure that that information is where my twinkle of an eye is looking. And setting duplicates of venture capitals and investment houses is probably not the way to go. Let us do that. let the country sit there and display itself and put that information to the place where I'm looking. If I'm looking over there, it's not much use having the information, over here. I'll eventually get there, but between you and that spot, there's probably, 40 other countries.
So, talking specifics, what kind of things do other countries do well that PNG could maybe learn from in that respect?
I think it really is, and again, it goes back to PNG is a small country, but that doesn't mean anything. You've got to use the modern technologies that we have. Already, someone's mentioned the word Google. Did I hear you say Google?
I did.
I wondered if we'd hear that. You've got to use those sorts of technologies and put the country and its opportunities to the fore. And we will see what's happened inside that country. I think when we first started, I mentioned Bougainville, the long memories that the investment community has. Well, the only way to overcome that is by saying, well, this is what's happened. This is what's happened. It's been a success. It's been a success. And the thought of Bougainville slowly retires to the investment community's rear of mind, and the country can then advance much more quickly. If you go ahead and duplicate a lot of other investment houses, you're wasting your time. You can put that resource into better productive use, I believe, by displaying yourself. And you've got a government that can do that already. You've got business organisations that can do that already.
Stephen, do you have a view on what other institutions maybe PNG could do with?
Just getting back to I think the funding and the local bond market is very important to the government. There's a range of things. Eric's mentioned electronic settlement. I think that's important. One of the things Australia did quite a while ago was go round and round the globe talking to investors. You mightn't realise this, but Australia is now one of the most liquid bond markets anywhere in the world. The 3-year bond is a world-class contract. Now, that didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of time. It took people like Don Stammer going around year after year, knocking on doors and talking to people. I think a global investment bank dealer panel needs to be appointed and remunerated. These guys will go out with the Treasury and Bank of PNG and talk to investors, engage with investors. Now, at the moment, we've got a bit of an issue with the currency. A lot of investors will look through that if they've got a very long time horizon. But they have to be engaged with, they have to find out what's going on. And they need to call, when something happens, when there's a headline, they need to be able to call someone and say, what's going on here? I think that could be a really good development. Kina-based funding is very important and should be enlarged over time. US dollar funding is also acceptable, but we've seen in the past that local funding is probably more sustainable. And I think it's something that the government needs to focus on a little bit more in terms of broadening that investor base. It's really critical.
Kenny, you have some thoughts on that? And even to add another thing into the mix, stock exchange is another opportunity maybe for reform as well?
Well, look, I think, just listening to all the commentaries, I think, and look, I think as a country, I think the business community has about, 5 or 6 conferences annually. And I think all of them are here in Australia. Why don't we take these conferences to Asia? Why don't we go and show the guys in China and Hong Kong and Singapore what we're all about as a country, and have these sort of conferences over there. And I think that's that's where the money is. Yeah. It just sort of makes sense that way. But again, in saying that, nothing against Australia, of course.
Yeah, look, I think when you have a look at the currency aspect that we've been talking about, as an investor, I face that problem with every country I'm in. 2015, where was the US dollar? What was it doing? Oh, it was that way. 2017, that way. You've really got to look at projects that are sustainable over time, and then the currency takes care of itself. Yes, when I'm starting a project, I'm very interested in where the kina is in terms of relative to other currencies, because the starting point gives me my capital cost base. And if it's high or low, that's probably the key. But once you get a sustainable project going, currency does tend to take care of itself. And by the time I've balanced the kina with the krona, with something else, in my returns, they tend to all eventually balance each other out, because I can't deal with them all at the same time, because it's near on impossible.
I've got I'm conscious Sid's going to be talking in about 5 to 10 minutes' time, and I wanted to throw this question to each of you in turn, as it's a little bit of a game more than anything else. But let's assume that Business Advantage is a cashed-up investor, and we have some money to give to you, the four of you. Let's give you 10 million kina each. I'm not going to place too much conditions on you. All I'm going to say is you have to invest it in a Papua New Guinea related investment, and it can be whatever you like, over what period you like, in whatever sector you like. If you had a complete free choice based on your hunches and what you know of the market, where would you be putting that 10 million kina? Maybe we'll start with you, Eric. There you go. We've got 10 million kina bid for Air New Guinea down in front of me.
Oh, we just put a bit of money in the other airline. Apologies. I know competition is bad for business, but I think choice is a good thing probably for the consumer. God, that's a nasty question.
Yes.
Where would I put that money? I would probably put some of that money in a cable, a data cable. It depends a bit on your objectives. How long do you want to lock it up for, or what kind of return objectives do you have? What kind of risk attitude do you have? But I think the cable is if we can organize it. I was going to say properly, but that sounds a bit silly. But if we can organize it, then I think that can be a game changer for the country, and has potential for return. I think that, and this is on the back of the microfinance and the financial inclusion summit that was held in Port Moresby last week. I think that some of the microfinance companies are interesting entities to look at and potentially invest in for a number of reasons. And there is that little problem, that little crowding out effect that occurs when interest rates are high. 12% on a government bond is not bad. It depends a bit on your risk appetite and your views with regards to the sovereign risk, but I think that can be a solid investment.
David,
I guess
here's 10 million.
from an external point of view, I think I would be looking still at this stage to probably look at projects that are externally focused in terms of their returns. So that would obviously draw me to the energy sector, LNG, and the minerals sector. I'm probably at this point not too comfortable in terms of perhaps looking at setting up a brick and mortar inside PNG, because it is a small country, and I've got to take that into account with all the other countries that I can invest in across the globe. But certainly it would be a project that would have an externally focused return, and the return was generated from external revenues. And obviously the key one there is and probably I'm maybe showing the flag a little bit, but resources especially.
Any particular resources project you got your eye on?
I'm not allowed to say, I'd have to kill you all.
Kennedy.
Well, I think when you asked the question, I had a few projects in mind. I think a lot of people don't know this, but let me just just touch on this a little bit. The fund is 100% owner of the metals refining operations in Papua New Guinea. The capacity of that place is able to process all gold and silver dug out of Papua New Guinea. It's sitting in Gordon's. Immediately, when you ask me the question, I would invest that money into start getting supply, into obviously processing and buying and stockpiling a lot of that wealth back on shore. And obviously, we've just made a large investment in agriculture. Obviously, you probably use part of that money to start to get the ball rolling on that investment just outside Port Moresby. So, yeah.
Metals refining sources. Okay. You had the longest time to think, Stephen. So.
Are there any constraints on this? Can I borrow?
None.
Okay, so I'd leverage it up a bit. Okay. There's quite a few things that need. I mean, can I do a few or just one?
Please.
I think leverage it up, possibly extend that runway at Kavieng for a tourism hub out of Kavieng. Leverage it up, possibly some sort of railway connection from the Highlands to Lae. Also, look at possibly the dry dock facility in Moresby. Look at developing that. But I think the cable is, cable probably on top of everything is the thing we really need to get sorted out. Yeah.